I'm Kate Masters for the Frederick News Post, and this is Beyond the Ballot, a series of in-depth interviews with all of Frederick County's most recently elected officials. And I am here today with Charlie Smith, and you are going into your fourth term as Frederick County State's Attorney.
I am, fourth term.
Okay, and you are J. Charles Smith III,
That
is that correct?
That is correct. I'm Joseph Charles Smith III, but I always grew up being called Charlie.
Okay, and there are two other J. Charlie Smiths then?
That's correct, So,
okay. Did you pass down the name?
You know what I did? I have Joseph Carson Smith. I passed down to Joseph, and doing some genealogy recently, I found out that he's the sixth Joseph Smith in our line. So,
wow.
I know, pretty cool.
Oh, you're leaving a legacy.
I know, I am. And I'm now that I told him that, he's afraid that, he won't have a boy to name Joseph Smith, but that's all right.
And I think I read in one of our previous articles that you grew up in Baltimore?
I did. I grew up in Baltimore City.
Okay.
That's where I was born and raised. I had three sisters and a brother. We lived in a row home in East Baltimore.
Okay.
And I was a prosecutor in Baltimore City, moved out to Frederick County, and then came into this office about 21 years ago in the Frederick County State's Attorney's Office. And 4 kids and, a lot of time, in Middletown, so.
Okay. And I wanted to ask, just in general, what made you want to become a lawyer?
It's funny, I went to a Votech high school, so I was one of just a few kids that even went to college, and I went to college to play football. And I never really thought I was going to be a lawyer. I just liked football and went to college, so most of my buddies back home are tradesmen. And then, as I took some classes, I thought, this is kind of cool. I really like people. I like communicating with people. I like debate and just critical thinking. And so I went on to law school. Did really well. Graduated near the top of my class. It just clicked for me. And the rest is history, I guess.
Okay. And where did you go to law school?
I went to the University of Baltimore.
Okay, so you sort of stayed homegrown.
Stayed homegrown. That's right.
Okay. And then what made you want to become a prosecutor in particular?
Well, you know what? That's a good question. That was just fate, really, because as I stated, I did very well in law school. And so the people at the top of their class get recruited by the big firms. So I went into a big firm, and I thought that, making lots of money was success. Obviously, coming from a more humble background, my dad was a cab driver and a locksmith. Okay. I thought making lots of money was what made you happy. Boy, I learned very quickly that wasn't the case. I mean, keeping track of every 6 minutes of your day and the pressure for billables, and really, ethically, it was tough. They were billing people for stuff I felt like I shouldn't be billing them for. It just wasn't for me. So I moved in. I went to an opportunity in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office because I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and it clicked for me.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
And as a prosecutor in Baltimore, what sort of cases were you working on?
Well, I did district court, and then I did juvenile. So I finished up in the juvenile division, which was a very, very busy division. So lots of, all sorts of felonies in the juvenile division, but no jury trials. So, and then actually after that, I went into private practice.
Okay, yeah. So you went back into private practice.
I really did, which was unusual, but started having kids. Wasn't making a lot of money in the prosecutor's office. Really loved what I was doing, but again, from my perspective, I thought, I just need to make more money, and that's really was the driving factor. It wasn't the subject matter of what I was doing or anything like that.
Okay. And are there any cases back from Baltimore that still stick out in your memory?
The thing that sticks out more than anything for me back then was how violent the juveniles were, and they were still maintained in the juvenile system, and that was bothersome to me because I would see somebody 6, 7, 8 times, same defendant, and yet they were still being handled in the juvenile system. Even whether it's, we had lots of car theft back then, tons of car theft. Juveniles were stealing. I mean, they would steal a dozen cars, 2 dozen cars sometimes before they were waived into the adult system. So I think that's what stood out the most is really sad that kids in the city are really involved in the justice system at an early age.
And did that carry with you onto Frederick County? Because I know that was something that you've sort of supported here as well. You spoke against a law that would require all juvenile offenders to be kept in juvenile prisons, I mean, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It did stick with me because, the focus of the juvenile system is rehabilitation, and it's much, much needed. We need more resources, and it's a really critical part of our overall justice system. But the problem is that when you have very violent juvenile offenders and you maintain them in the juvenile system, it's like they corrupt all the other kids that are in there, for lack of a better way of putting it. At least that's my opinion. And so I really feel like that for the most violent repeat offenders and the guys who just don't get it, that you need to cull them out of that population so that we can rehab that population as a whole. And I feel like they're an impediment to that.
Okay, so you do think that there are some offenders who just are they can't be
even at a young age, they just are. They are, and that's sad. But even at 16 and 17, I think they can be rehabilitated. But I think it's time to start punishing them along with their rehabilitation. I mean, there comes a point in time where you can't rehabilitate an offender. I'm not saying that occurs at 16, 17, or 18, but I do believe that they should be removed from that environment and their rehabilitation should occur in the adult system.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that you said that you made your way to Frederick County 21 years ago, and what brought you here?
I wanted to move out of the city.
Okay.
I grew up there. I used to tease people. I said I went from rats to cows. But so I moved to Mount Airy in Frederick County, just looking for a house that wasn't in the city, and then became sort of Frederick-centric from that standpoint. So I was living in Frederick County, and I was a prosecutor in Baltimore City. So it was a little bit of a commute. But that's basically how I got to Frederick County, and you just sort of it grew on me. I love Frederick County. It's been a really awesome place to raise all four of my kids, and I'm here for the duration.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you make your way into the state's attorney's office here?
I had a short stint in private practice. I was doing very well in the defense bar, and at that time, the previous state's attorney, Scott Raleigh, chose me to come into his office to be one of his executive staff members, deputy state's attorney as we called it then. Judge Julie Solt was the previous deputy state's attorney. She was appointed to the bench, so there's a vacancy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that you took over for Raleigh in 2006, and
Right.
what made you want to run for his spot?
I wanted to keep my job. With all sincerity, I don't really like the politics piece of it. And with all due respect to Scott, Scott's more of a politician. He ran for Congress, ran for Attorney General, and there's plenty of state's attorneys that do that type of stuff. Doug Gansler and the rest. And so for many, Rudy Giuliani, for many it's a stepping stone for future political aspirations. For me, it really wasn't. I was happy doing what I was doing. I always did love being a prosecutor, still do. So for me, it was really just, here's a guy who's moving on. The new president doesn't keep the old vice president type of thing. And so I just thought it was best for me, for job security, to run. And,
Okay.
And, I ran and was fortunate enough to get elected.
Okay, but you don't like the campaigning aspect of it.
I don't like it at all. It was no fun asking people for money, or hey Kate, stake this sign in your yard. It's just no fun at all.
Yeah, but this year you ran uncontested, right?
I did.
Yeah, so it was a little less pressure.
Oh, it was a lot less pressure. That's definitely the way to run.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you, I recommend it for everybody running for office.
Okay.
So it was really good. I tease people. I said, either nobody wants this job, or people must think I'm doing a pretty good job at it. So one of the two. Either one I'll take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that even as far back as 2006, people were calling you the law and order prosecutor.
Right.
Like, why? Why was that?
I think because I feel very strongly about violent offenders in our community. They should be removed. I mean, we all want a place to raise our kids. We want our spouses to be safe. We want to be safe as we walk the streets. I mean, nobody wants to get mugged downtown, and nobody wants their children to be molested or anything like that. So I really believe strongly in that these people should be punished, that it's punitive, and that's a critical part of our justice system. But I'm also extremely a strong believer in rehabilitation. I mean, we have great programs like our youthful offender program for our juveniles, our drug court program for adult offenders. As I tell people, there's lots and lots of good people making bad decisions on our dockets. They're not the people that we need to punish. But there's lots of bad people in this world now, and we need to punish them and remove them so that our communities can be safe.
And I know that you have also fought for lengthy sentences, especially for criminals whose victims are children. And why did that become such a special focus for you?
You know, I grew up in a big family. I grew up in the city. I mean, families were critically important. I think they're the backbone of our entire country. I really do. I feel very strongly about that. I've seen families that have been destroyed because of their children being offended and offending on both sides. So I also was a sex offense prosecutor for a lot of years. When I came into the office, I was chief of the sex offense division, what we call our family violence unit now, family violence division. So I think they're worse than murderers. I really do. I mean, somebody who's going to offend either an elderly person or really young. I mean, it's incomprehensible how you would offend a 5 or 6 year old kid. And so for those people, I really do believe they're hardwired that way. I don't believe that rehabilitation exists for those types of offenders. I think it's I just think they're hardwired that way. And so I think the only way to keep our children safe is to remove them from the population, put them in jail.
And are there any specific cases from your time doing family services that sort of really stuck with you and sort of implemented that belief?
Well, you know, we're a very hands-on prosecutor's office. We work very closely with all of our police agencies. So prosecutors go out to crime scenes. We do ride-alongs. We work hand in hand with them. We think it's important. So I've been out to a lot of crime scenes, unfortunately involving children. I've handled a couple of death penalty cases. In Frederick County, we don't have the death penalty anymore. Both of them involve children. One baby being, who was dropped to the ground. Is a case called Sonia Daniels. It was a double homicide. She shot the mother through the neck, and as the baby fell to the ground, she put the gun in the baby's mouth and fired it, and obviously destroyed the baby. So that was one. Another one was a really horrible baby rape case where the baby was raped and killed, and those will stick with you forever, especially when you go out to the scene and you see what happens. It's tough. I have utmost respect for our first responders. I can't imagine what they go through on a daily basis. For us to go to these major crime scenes, a number of times a year, but to do that on a daily basis is crazy, especially with the opioid issue. I just have an immense amount of respect for our first responders, our EMTs that are going out and finding these young kids that are dead from overdoses and seeing this on a daily, weekly basis. It's terrible.
Yeah. And coming into the state's attorney's office and taking over in 2006, what did you see as the biggest public safety issues for Frederick back then? Gangs
was a big one. Drugs. I grew up in the city. My sister was a heroin addict early on and dropped out of school in 8th grade and ultimately died from her addiction. So I knew that drugs were an issue. I saw that destroy families. I saw it really really have a devastating effect on my family and my parents. And then I knew gangs were a problem. We saw it early on with the youth. When you have 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds joining gangs, you have problems. And so we saw that trend early on. And it's come to fruition because now we see a lot of gang activity coming out of Montgomery County, and now we have gangs established in Frederick County, and we're doing everything we can to combat that.
And do you think that the problem has grown, or?
I think the gang problem has certainly grown less because of our proactive approach to it. We've taken down some major gangs. Other gangs come in and take their place. We had a major Bloods takedown years ago that we did with the state police. So we don't see a lot of that. Some of it, but not a lot of it. But now we have MS-13 coming in. They're taking over. Some Latin Kings come up from Montgomery County. So we're seeing that predominate now, especially in the west side of town in the city.
And beyond the prosecutorial aspect, do you think that there are other ways to fight gang violence in Frederick that start sort of at the bottom?
Absolutely. We need to get into the schools. We need to make it part of the curriculum. Obviously, our children are our future. We need to get in. We need to provide them with resources to say, I know it's contrite to say just say no to drugs or gangs or whatever, but if we get into the middle schools or even the elementary schools, and we tell them, and let them know that there are resources for them, and that they shouldn't be sort of pushed into that lifestyle, because once you go into the gang, it's very difficult to get out of it.
Yeah, and speaking of youthful offenders as well, I know that we just recently had a riot at Victor Cullen, which dominated a lot of headlines.
It sure did.
And I mean, do you see the juvenile justice system as performing as it should? Do you think that there are issues within it?
Well, there's always going to be issues. There's always going to be lack of resources, a big one, and I also think that we have swung too far. The pendulum swung too far from decades ago, where we didn't have a lot of resources for youth, and maybe we were perhaps somewhat too strict on certain offenders. Now it's swung the other way. I mean, people have to offend so many times for us to, again, come down on them, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we're afraid to take these really violent offenders. We want to continue to rehabilitate them, but this is the stuff that they do. So again, we need to remove them, allow the kids that are there who really do need resources, who we really will turn around and we won't see anymore, to get the resources they need. So I think the pendulum has swung way too far the other way in terms of kid gloves, for lack of a better way of putting it, for too many offenders. Because there's some bad dudes at 16, 17. I mean, they're violent. They're tough. I wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley, that's for sure.
Yeah, although in the Victor Cullen riot, I know, our reporter Jeremy Arias just reported that guards were also equally implicated in that altercation.
That's a problem too. We see it with COs, correctional officers, and some guards. I think it's difficult to get, I guess just hiring is a difficult issue for that. It's a tough job, and it really is a tough job. So, sometimes I think you don't get the quality of person that you want in that position. But again, it's a really difficult job, so I can understand why recruiting might be difficult. And what happens is you get some people, like some of these guards, who perhaps aren't acting the way they should be acting. But overall, I mean, we're really lucky, especially in Frederick County. We have a high level of professionalism in our law enforcement community and in our correctional community. So we're lucky to have that here in Frederick. We really are. And
do you think that there's a solution to weeding out sort of those bad actors at the upper levels within the correctional system?
I guess that, I'd have to give that some thought, but yeah, sure. Obviously, I think it starts with hiring, and trying to get higher quality applicants, more pay for those jobs, so that people would be willing to do them. But when it's low pay and it's a job where you have to deal with that type of population, it's a stressful job and it would wear on you. So, just my initial reaction to it would be recruiting. We need to focus on how we can recruit a higher quality candidate.
And I wanted to give you the chance to brag a little bit, because you've been state's attorney for about 12 years now.
Correct, yeah.
And looking back at your terms, are there any major successes that you think your office has had, or really big accomplishments that you want to tout?
Absolutely. Well, first thing I'd like to tout is it came to my attention that there has been no four-term state's attorney before in the history of Frederick County. So I guess I set a record there, which is good. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that the community has put me back into office for 4 terms. What we really worked on was to make this a very highly professional office. I had that big firm experience, which was good. It was positive, in some ways negative in others, but I really wanted to recruit a quality of person here to Frederick. First of all, it's a great place to live, it's a great place to raise your family, and it's a great place to work. So I knew that I could get people from outside this region. So we began to recruit from Baltimore, from the DC area, to get really high quality staff, prosecutors, and we've been very successful. And now our positions are incredibly competitive. I mean, for one position, we'll get over 100, 120 applicants for a lawyer position. And so we were able to really pick the best of the best. and they're just doing a great job for the citizens. They're doing a great job in court. They're doing a great job behind the scenes. We have excellent paralegal staff, investigative staff, victim witness staff. So really, to lead them and to grow them as leaders and grow them as people. So not only do we want them to be good prosecutors, but I want them to be good people. I want them to be good community members. So we focus on outreach in our communities. And I'm just so proud of my staff. It's a great office to work in. It really is. And I guess that big picture is what is sort of the legacy I want to live and leave. And we have prosecutors' offices from even Montgomery County coming up and saying, "Hey, we see how you're doing this," and they'll come up and take a look at it. So we've really advanced. We're paperless now. We're very efficient in what we do. We've reduced staff over the years when other people have increased it. So obviously the taxpayer in me still recognizes that we just don't fill positions because we've always had them. We've actually reduced our staff. So that's probably my biggest accomplishment is what I feel, and service. What that results in ultimately is not only efficiency, but it results in people who really believe in what they're doing, and therefore you get great service to your community, whether you're a victim, whether you're a witness in a case, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a judge. I mean, the judges will say, "Hey, Charlie, so-and-so you just hired, super sharp, doing a great job in court." And that's what I love to hear.
And are there any specific cases where you felt like you really succeeded?
There are, obviously each case is important on its own. We've had truly meaningful cases for elderly people who are just recouped $500, $600, $700. And they just, they'll write you Christmas cards and stuff like that. So what we have to remember is that every case is the most important case to that victim. That is whether it's, they got ran off the road by a drunk driver and, nothing happened to them, but they feel, that justice has to be served, or whether it's a homicide case where they lost a loved one. But the one that comes to mind is, a murder trial that we handled a number of years ago where a husband had killed his wife, shot her twice.
Okay.
Jimmy Trout's parents. And we were able to successfully implement what they call the Slayer's Rule in Maryland. I went down and testified. We got legislation passed because what happened was he was using the estate to pay money to pay for all his lawyers and to give away to other kids and stuff like that. So we were able to go down to Annapolis with Kelly Schultz and Jimmy Trout and get legislation passed that said, "Hey, look, if you kill your loved one, you can't financially benefit from it." And that's on the books in Maryland now. Yeah,
and I know that even in the past year, there was a conviction in the Lloyd Harris case, which was, over 20 years.
Yeah, that was a great case. Nancy Ham, who was my deputy state's attorney, did an excellent job in that case. You talk about, and that was a case that was really tough. We just needed a little bit more in that case. So we finally got it. Kudos to Frederick Police Department, who never gave up on it. And those cold cases are very difficult to prove. And so we were successful in that trial. And that's one that'll always stand out as well.
Yeah. And on the other hand, are there any situations or cases during your terms where you feel like you failed?
Yes. Yeah. Any time that a lawyer, prosecutor has a not guilty, you feel personally for that failure. It'll stick with you. I remember one that I had. I fortunately only had one not guilty. It was in 1999. And it was a young girl who was molested by her grandfather and contracted herpes as a result of it. And the judge threw it out on a technicality. And it'll always stick with me. That'll always stick with me. Here's a young girl whose life is forever changed, who won't have justice. They're tough.
Yeah, and I know even more recently in the past week, I think that you were disappointed with an acquittal in a recent murder
Absolutely,
case.
I was very disappointed with that. And it's tough. Jurors have a tough job. They have all this preconceived notion of the criminal justice system that they have to gel with the real world. They're not the same. The jury instructions were very complicated. The only thing I can think of is that they just misunderstood the jury instructions, because both Mike Moore and Kirsten Brown did a great job presenting. It was a compelling case. And some of the notes that they wrote back showed that they were having trouble understanding the self-defense instructions, because they were asking specific questions about it. So they obviously were having a problem with figuring that out, and ultimately resulted in a not guilty on Mr. Hill, which was unfortunate.
Yeah. And as a prosecutor, I mean, are you still looking for those guilty verdicts always?
I tell you, no. As I tell people, believe it or not, the most difficult part of my case isn't prosecuting murder trials. It's telling people that we're not prosecuting their case. They're the ones that get people riled up. So, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the biggest haters are like, I can't believe you're not prosecuting this case. The guy pulled up my rose bush. It was on, it's on my property, and I want a malicious destruction of he needs to go to jail forever. We're like, sir, ma'am, whatever. It's, this is a civil dispute. And so those are the most difficult cases that we handle, is telling people we're not, or telling police officers, quite frankly, we're not prosecuting that case. We don't have enough on the guy. I know he's a drug dealer. I know he's a menace. But the bottom line is we have an ethical obligation to prosecute cases that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And if we can't do it, we don't do it. We're not just throwing something up against the wall and seeing what sticks. I mean, that is not what our oath is. That's not what our obligation is. And that'll never be how we handle business.
Yeah. And in your time as state's attorney, have there been any really controversial cases where you have faced public backlash?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It could be either from not charging, let's say, a police officer. There's an Ethan Saylor case.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of that case.
It was terrible. It was a terrible what happened. But the bottom line is that our responsibility, I don't care if you're that neighbor or you're a police officer, if it's not criminal, okay, and we can't prove each and every element of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt, we won't do it. I mean, we just won't do it. You're talking about taking somebody's liberty away from them, potentially. And so that was not a criminal case. Now, whatever happens civilly or internally about police protocol, whether it was followed or not, different story. We don't get into that. Not our problem to handle. But did those officers commit a crime? Absolutely not. They didn't commit a crime.
And why is that? Like, when you look at the case from, from a legal perspective, why was a crime not permitted or committed?
Well, because it wasn't a manslaughter, we would have had to prove, that they had a reckless disregard for human life. For example, the drunk guy speeding down 100 miles an hour down Main Street through a parade or something. Maybe he doesn't mean to kill anybody, but he has a total reckless disregard for people's safety or their life. I mean, that wasn't what was happening here. The officers were doing what they felt they were trained to do. And there wasn't any, first of all, there wasn't any intent to kill them, so it wasn't a murder. And so the only other charge there would have been a manslaughter charge. And we explained that to the members of the grand jury. We gave them all the instructions of manslaughter and homicide, and they declined to indict. And so, ultimately it was a grand jury's decision not to indict on them. And it was the right one, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I was also wondering, because in 2015, I think you mentioned that there were law enforcement reforms that would become big issues both nationally and in Maryland. Things like body cameras, greater scrutiny of police use of force.
Right.
And for you as a prosecutor, how have those developments helped or hindered your office?
Well, body cams are good and bad. They're problematic from a resource perspective because we just didn't have the resources to have every agency roll out body camera evidence, because we have an obligation to review it, redact it. So if someone's naked on it, or we've had officers wear them into the emergency room, and you can see people on stretchers, or nobody wants their personal health issue to be public record. So for that, redaction was a big problem for us. It wasn't necessarily what they captured, because a lot of prosecutors believe it's helpful to prove cases, and defendants see themselves on film, and they'll plead guilty or take responsibility more quickly. But for us, it was a resource issue, so we just weren't prepared to deal with it. because again, we have a constitutional obligation to the defendants as well. People don't realize that. If we can't give them all of that information so that they have it to take a look at, I mean, it would have been problems prosecuting these cases. So not against it in practice, just against, I mean, in theory, I'm against it. If we can't do it right, then we shouldn't be doing it at all.
Okay. And has the office expanded its capability to deal with those body camera videos?
We haven't. The sheriff is not rolling them out, is my understanding. The police, city police, the chief is maintaining the number of cameras that they currently have. So and we just deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so it doesn't seem to be expanding.
It doesn't seem to be expanding at this time.
Okay.
You know, so.
Yeah. And looking at Frederick County today, what do you think are some of the biggest public safety concerns that still exist now in 2018?
You know, I still say that for those in the city, gangs are still a big issue. That's a problem. We see, obviously, you hate to beat this drum, but the opioid crisis is just out of control.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It really is. And we need to, in my opinion, we need to move up into the dealers, into the pill mills. We need to prosecute those who are bringing the drugs into the country illegally, because it's very easy to get. You know, we need to deal with the addiction issue. As you know, that's close to home for me. But we really need to go law and order on the businessmen, the business people who are making money on this, knowing that these people are being addicted. Those are the ones that use zero tolerance. They're as bad as murderers. They're murdering people, in my opinion, not in a legal sense, but every single day in this country. And so we need to come down on them.
Yeah. And you mentioned your sister a little bit earlier. And can you tell me a little bit more about that and your personal experience? Sure.
Well, I told you where we grew up, so you knew which block to get drugs on, and I was a sports guy, I think, as I told you before, so I never really, never got into that scene. But my one sister did, and she became, started smoking pot and stuff, and then went on to harder drugs, which often happens, and she dropped out of school in 8th grade, ran away to Texas. Of course, some drug dealing, boyfriend who was 6 years older than her, had her convinced that, this was the thing to do. But she lived a life of addiction, which was very sad, because I saw it on a first-hand basis. Out of the 5 kids, Becky and I were the closest in age. We were only about 16 months apart. But it continued even up to law school. She moved in with me. I tried to help her out raising her daughter at that point in time. Because I had seen her, where she lived, and it was tough. It was rat infested, roach infested, little girl sleeping in pizza box type of stuff. So, and she was a prostitute for many years as well, down on what they call the Block, which is a prostitution red light district in Baltimore City. So I just tried to pull her out of it. I saw the destruction that it had on her and her family, and I saw the destruction it had on my parents. My parents are old school. My mom's a coal miner's daughter from Tennessee, and Dad was just a city kid who, was a hard-working World War II Marine. So they were good people with good salt of the earth. And I saw what it did to them, and they really questioned what they did wrong. And ultimately, they didn't do anything wrong. They loved us all. It just was circumstance, I guess. And so ultimately, she passed away from, she had hepatitis really bad, had a bunch of other issues. She had emergency trach, and she had fried her lungs and stuff like that. She didn't overdose and die like we're seeing a lot today, but ultimately all of that medical stuff got to her and she passed away. So, yeah.
And I know that now your office is pursuing harsher penalty to dealers whose drugs lead to overdoses, things like manslaughter,
correct,
longer sentences. And is that an office-wide policy now that you've implemented?
Unfortunately, that's very case specific, so it's not an office-wide policy. We go through a really strict review process to see if we can prove it, because it's very difficult, given our state of our laws, to prove that. We really have been pushing for legislation down in Annapolis to get a law in the books that's very similar to the federal law, which makes it easier to prosecute a dealer who knowingly sells fentanyl to someone, and knowing and that causes a death. So we're trying to push for better legislation to make that an easier tool to use. Because right now, given the manslaughter laws, it's difficult. It's a high bar to set. Not to say we can't reach it, but it just really, you have to be selective in your cases.
Yeah, and I've covered the opioid addiction issue, for some time in Frederick County as the health reporter when I was working as a health reporter. And I know that, to a lot of advocates and people active in the community, there's concern that harsher penalties for dealers would also penalize people who might be selling drugs to support their own habit or dealing, because they're mired in their own addiction.
Right.
And so how would you respond to that, to concerns that more punitive measures is just going to exacerbate the problem?
Absolutely not. I would 100% disagree with that. You can craft legislation that would exempt those type of people. I mean, not to say that there's not addicts that maybe are high-level dealers that are moving a lot of product. Well, if that's the case, they need to be punished. But certainly, you're not talking about two people who are going out, buying some heroin, splitting it up, selling it to pay for their own. That's not what we're looking at. I mean, technically that is distribution, but certainly that would not be the type of offender that we would target.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be.
And how do you define, dealer then?
I mean, you can make it a repeat offense type of issue, which would mean that, if you have a pre-existing felony distribution or PWID, possession with intent to distribute, so you can make it like a repeat offender type of thing. You can make it a quantity-based thing. So if you're found to have been dealing a certain amount of quantity, there are ways that you can carve out that innocent population, or non-dealer, non-businessman population, and still make it an effective piece of legislation.
Okay. And I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Maryland Medical Marijuana Commission.
Okay.
Because I know that you sit on that.
I do.
And to me, that was a very interesting development for you. Because I know
It
that.
was.
Yeah, I know that in 2010, you sort of opposed the program, and
I did.
You opposed the decriminalization in 2014.
And I still do. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's your rationale, behind thinking that?
You mean my rationale behind being on the Medical Cannabis Commission, or
just being
decriminalization?
Yeah, let's talk about decriminalization first and your opposition to that.
Right.
And where does that stem from?
It probably stems from growing up in the city and seeing the devastating effect that drugs, including marijuana, has on our youth. It just does. I don't, I'm not telling people that it's society's greatest ill. It's just not. But certainly it's not good for our youthful population. It's just not. I mean, the studies have shown that, brain's developing up till 25, 26, and that smoking marijuana on a regular basis is just bad for your brain. And so I really opposed it because there were no age restrictions on this whatsoever. So it's decriminalized for everybody, a 12-year-old as well as a 82-year-old. And so I just really thought that if they could have been a lot more forward-thinking in terms of decriminalization. Whether, someone once said, grow your own, smoke your own inside your house. You're not bothering anybody. And I could see how, libertarian that would appeal to someone like that. But you know what? I don't want somebody smoking dope on the park bench and blowing it in my kid's face, or coming in. They didn't handle it correctly. A flat decrim with no restrictions whatsoever was the wrong way to go about it.
Okay. And were you tentative about the medical program in Maryland as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I was. But I got a call from Governor Hogan, and he asked me to be on the commission, and I said no.
Okay.
So, and I got another call. And said, we have a state's attorney's representative. It's law. We're just looking for somebody. And so I said yes, because one reason and one reason only. I do believe that there is some medical benefit from cannabinoids, and I want the program to be medical cannabis. Okay, So if it's medicine, and I believe it can be medicine, then we need to treat it as medicine. So we don't need guys in dreadlocks coming in saying, hey, I think it cures cancer, which is what we have right now. Okay, there's ads saying we can't have that. So if it's going to be used for, let's say you do a study and it works for, epileptics, then that's great. Then it can be a medicine. Mm-hmm. Now we can talk about whether you smoke it or whether you take it in different form, whether you can take certain, like I said, cannabinoids out of it that are beneficial, that don't get you high. But I don't think it should be a pseudo-recreational industry.
Okay, so you would never support a recreational model?
No, I would definitely not support a recreational use of marijuana.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you think the medical program's rollout has been I think it's been about a year since it was fully implemented?
I'm the policy chair for the commission, so we've made some good strides. I think we've restricted advertising so that it doesn't appeal to our youth. I mean, you can't be showing people with smoking joints and calling it euphoria medicine. I mean, nobody wants to be euphoric if they're taking an antibiotic or whatever. So again, if it's medicine, and I believe it does have medicinal qualities, we need to define those. So my next step really is to try to roll out the research piece. And the problem has really been that the federal government has never seen the medicinal quality in this product. So we've never really studied it. And I really am very big on studying it, figuring out what it's good for, what it's not good for, and rolling it out as a medicine.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah, of course, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because federal bans
That's
also make it difficult to research.
I know, so we need to change that. We need to research it. That's how I feel.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in your time as state attorney, have there been any criminal justice reforms that have caught your eyes? Anything in terms of rehabilitation or reforms to the system that you think have been really positive developments?
JRA, Justice Reinvestment Act, is just rolled out recently. It's had a lot of positive, to reduce our prison population. But the problem is, there's been big problems too, and that we have people that now have to offend 3-4 times on probation before any true sanction comes down. So unfortunately, the pendulum on that end swung too far, and now we're super lenient on a lot of stuff. And again, I'm not saying I'm the strictest, most conservative prosecutor in the country, but offenders need to be punished. We can't go too soft on crime. I recognize that there are some people that should have not been in prison, but at the same time, I'm sorry. If you're a 4th-time DUI offender, you should go to jail. And we're having problems getting those people in jail now. That's ridiculous. There comes a point in time where, listen, people, you can talk to them till you're blue in the face, but until there's some true sanction, they're not going to change their conduct. And that's just human nature, in my opinion. And so we need to come down on the offenders that aren't changing their conduct. And again, the good people making bad decisions, that's not who we're talking about. They'll know just because of having to go to court or because they had to plead guilty to something, they have something temporary on the record. They're going to change their ways. They're going to be like, no way, I don't want this ever to happen again. And so I'm not worried about those people. Our system takes care of those people. It's the people that refuse to stop drinking and driving. It's the people that refuse to stop stealing people's property or breaking into their houses. And now, I think with justice reinvestment, unfortunately, they're playing the system, and that's a bummer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie, we've spoken a lot about your career, and I wanted to also give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about yourself. And you mentioned your family earlier in the interview, but I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about them.
Sure.
Okay.
My wife, Desiree, is a special agent for the FBI.
Okay.
So, which everybody laughs at because they're like, great, your mom's a FBI agent, your dad's the state's attorney, you guys are screwed. Poor kids, so they can't get away with anything. But, we have 2 girls, 2 boys, and 2 in the house, 2 outside the house. So we live in Middletown. We lived there for the last 16, 17 years. So all 4 kids have gone up through Middletown High School. We're public school people. I grew up and went through public schools. My wife grew up in South Buffalo in the city, went through public schools. So, and you know, the cool thing about it is that we really both really love our upbringing. I mean, I think it really gives you a heart for people. Haven't seen good people grow up in bad situations. So it really does give you a sense of compassion, but it also, you see bad people doing bad things, so it gives you that law and order piece. So it's a great balance, and we strike that balance. We're a big faith family. We're a strong Christian family.
Okay.
So we're active in our church.
And what church do you attend?
We go to Calvary Assembly in Walkersville, which is an awesome church. We just love our pastors, and it's a very diverse church. We have an which we really love. Growing up in the cities, we love that diverse population. I love seeing black people, white people, Hispanics, Asians. I mean, we have a very diverse church population, which is cool. We want our kids to be involved in that. Because Middletown, although we love it, it's beautiful. We're big outdoors people too. It's not super diverse population. So, so we're very active in our church. I'm a big outdoors guy. I love to fish. We love to hike. I'm also, Mr. Fix-It, with the Votech background. So, anything that needs to get built or fixed in the house, I do it. So she's got lots of projects for me to do.
Yeah.
Super blessed. I mean, just great kids. Been very fortunate. Great job. I tease people. I mean, my buddies from back home, we're big sports guys too. I was a big Baltimore Colts fan, so we're big Ravens, Buffalo Bills family. But guys back home tease me. They say, "Charlie, we always thought you'd need a lawyer, not be a lawyer." So, because I was a little bit of a hellion as a kid. My parents had their hands full, but so to be where I'm at and to have a beautiful wife who's got a great job and kids that are all half normal. Life is good. I'm really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you and your wife like to talk about your jobs at home, or is it like a no talking about?
You know what? Believe it or not, it's more no talk.
Okay.
Because she has confidences that she has to keep, and I do too. Once in a while, we'll talk about something over the dinner table. The kids have grown up, unfortunately, hearing about murders and rapes and stuff like that. In terms of what we have to keep confidential, we keep confidential. We respect each other's role, and we understand each other's need for confidence in our positions. So, it's a don't ask, don't tell type of situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're a triathlete as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was a college football player, and I like pushing myself to the limit.
So intense.
Yeah. So everybody's like, you're the busiest guy I know. So I get up really early in the morning and I work out. I've done Ironman triathlon, run the JFK 50 miler a couple times. So it's a 50-mile race through the mountains over in Boonesboro. And I really enjoy that. I ride for a cycling team now because as I'm getting older, running's harder on the body.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy that intensity, I guess, and seeing how far you can push yourself. So I enjoy that too. Keep in shape. Takes care of the stress because it is a stressful job. It really is a stressful job. And so that's one way I can burn it off. And podcast or just listen to nothing and just be mindless for an hour and a half or whatever in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some rapid fire questions as well,
cool.
if you're ready. Okay. So first of all, are you a dog person or a cat person?
Dog person. We have 2 dogs, 2 cats. I'm the dog guy in the house.
Okay. And what are your dogs' names?
We have a Labradoodle named Chewy because he gets furry. He looks just like Chewbacca. And we have little Pepper. She's a terrier. She's my running buddy, so she goes for runs with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's your astrological sign?
I am a Virgo.
You're a Virgo?
Yeah. So
do you identify with that?
I don't know what it means. So other than I know I'm a Virgo.
Okay.
So I don't know what type of person is a Virgo. So I can't answer that.
What about pie or cake? Are you a pie or cake guy?
I'm a cake guy.
Okay.
Big time.
What's your favorite cake?
Pecan pie.
Pecan pie cake?
No, you know what's funny?
Okay.
I don't like pies. I don't like blueberry pie,
Okay.
apple pie. I don't eat any of that stuff. But I like pecan pie. But I am a cake guy. I'm a chocolate cake guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you could have dinner with 3 people, living or dead, who would you want to have dinner with?
Oh my, living or dead? Obviously, I got to pick Jesus.
Okay.
Absolutely top of the list. I mean, if I could break bread with our Savior, I'm all over that. I guess a couple of other people, living or dead. I mean, I think that in our founding fathers, so, it comes to mind maybe a George Washington or something that would have been cool to see how they created this country and to sort of be in the middle of like all that they had to think about. And then, probably somebody like a Martin Luther King, somebody who had to go through a lot of, difficulty and transition just to see, because, I mean, the guy was strong in his faith and just somebody who would be really a superhuman being, a modern day superhuman being like that, who dealt with adversity, dealt with hate, and just responded and with total love. Would be pretty cool to be around somebody like that.
Yeah, and of course he and Jesus would have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. That's right, they would.
What about books? Do you have a favorite book of all time?
Law school ruined me for books.
You just never want to read again.
My youngest daughter, will this play before Christmas?
We're breaking,
I got her a T-shirt.
We're breaking the fourth wall.
Okay, I got her a T-shirt.
It'll play after. It'll be the 27th.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So she won't know. It says bookmarks are for quitters. I love it because she just reads like 2-3 books a week. My wife's the same way. I'm a magazine guy. I'm a periodical. I like the quick hit.
Okay.
So I don't, unfortunately, read many books.
Okay. What's your favorite magazine?
Like, I read triathlete and cycling, stupid stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. How to get faster, how to get more efficient, my biking and running, stuff like that.
Okay.
Pretty sad.
Well, what about movies? Do you have 3 favorite movies or desert island movies that you would pick?
Yeah, I think I could pick some movies. We're a big Harry Potter family.
Okay.
So all the Harry Potter movies are really cool. Lord of the Rings movies are really cool. I'm a sci-fi guy, so I'm down with all that. So that's pretty fun stuff. Probably my favorite movie of all is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh, I love that one.
Just a great movie. And believe it or not, I probably should, somebody's going to yank my man card, but I went and saw a movie with my daughter that was really great, and now it was a love story, and it was a musical she's into.
Is it La La Land?
La La
Land.
Land. What a great movie.
Yeah.
It really was a cool movie. I'm like, I don't know if I should tell people that, but I would definitely watch that over and over again.
Okay.
Great movie.
Yeah, and you're cheating the system too because you have 3 super long movie series and then La La
Yeah,
Land.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you know
it was a
what to
really
do.
fantastic movie. It was one of my favorite movies. It really was. It really was.
Wow.
She's my artistic one of my 4 kids, so
Okay.
she's into singing and theater and stuff like that.
Okay. And what is your alcoholic drink of choice?
I'm not I like a glass of red wine every now and again, and I like an IPA every now and again, but I don't like liquor at all. I don't drink any liquor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've kind of talked about it, but I usually ask your biggest hobby outside the office. But then, of course, we've talked about you being a triathlete.
Yeah, exactly. So, I like to exercise. I like to fish. Fishing's a great stress reliever. And I love to hike. My wife and I love to hike. Like if we go on vacation, we make sure we go hiking somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you guys have a favorite restaurant in Frederick?
Yes, I guess if we're doing Italian, we like Il Porto, which is a great restaurant. Brewer's Alley is an awesome restaurant just to go get a great burger, something along those lines. So that's those are the 2 that come to mind.
Okay. And Charlie, I think the only other question I have for you is whether there's anything or any things on your bucket list that you really want to do but you haven't crossed off yet.
Bucket list items. I want to see the Grand Canyon. Haven't seen that yet. I want to travel a little bit more. I'm telling people that I'm going to start taking 2-week vacations because I'd love to go out west. I just watched a documentary on Idaho. Man, it's absolutely gorgeous out there. So I would love to be able to take those more nature, outdoor-oriented trips with the kids, or maybe just the wife or something. I could hop in an RV and take 2 weeks somewhere, just driving around. I would love it.
Yeah. Have you traveled outside the country at all?
I have. I've been fortunate to go to Ireland. My ancestry is from Ireland and England, so as well as my wife. So we went to Ireland once. We went on a cruise with all 4 kids down in the Bahamas type of stuff, some of the islands down there. And one of my things I just checked off my bucket list this year was I always wanted to do one of those catamaran trips, boat trips to the British Virgin Islands. So we did that this year.
Okay, that's
for 7
very
days.
fun.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. Well, Charlie, thank you very much for coming in and speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
It really has been.
Great having you.
Yeah, thanks.